Hello and welcome to For Future Generations, episode 18. It is the 1st of June. It is the Lord's Day, my dudes, and we are happy to have you along. And we are joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Sean. Sean, how are you, man?
I'm good. We are no longer in the Easter season. We are now officially at the Sunday of the Ascension, which is
That's
awesome.
right.
Next week will be Pentecost. And
yeah.
Then we'll
big deal in church history. That's when things kind of all got started. But we are joined today very graciously by Musonius Rufus of Rebel Yell. We appreciate you coming along. Musonius, how are you, man?
I'm pretty good. How's my audio?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear. Not a problem. And I was talking with Musonius a while back, and we kind of got on the subject of Bible translations. And kind of nerding out just a little bit, and it was pretty awesome. I said, "Hey, man, could you come on the show and just kind of do a repeat of this? Because it's an interesting subject. It can be a deep and complex subject, but there's some once you know the history, there's some through lines that kind of illuminate, why there are so many translations and where did they all come from." So, Musonius, glad to have you along. And so before we get too far into this, I did just want to mention that intro video that y'all saw just now. That was Sean on the guitar there.
Yeah.
So if you like what he did there, drop in the comments, tell him how awesome he is. If you didn't like it, keep it to yourself.
Also drop that in the comments. Yeah. This is my baby right here. The only Mexican allowed in my house right here. My Mexican Stratocaster.
Dadgum, man. How many pickups do you have on that thing?
It's just 4. It's pretty normal. This is this sticker. Shout out to David North. Gave me this 2 years back.
It's a White Whale Summer. Very cool.
Now that we're starting White Boy Summer, thought I'd share that.
Yeah. Shout out to that. Yeah. So, Musonius, glad to have you along. Musonius, some of y'all will know from the Rebel Yell podcast, and taking a little bit of a hiatus, but hopefully back soon. Got some stuff in the can, from what I understand. So, be cool. But Musonius, kind of let us. So, where did Bible translations start? Like in the Americas, when the founders came over on the Mayflower and the settlers that were coming and founding this nation, what was the Bible that they had tucked under their arm?
Well, I mean, mostly the King James, but the Geneva was there. I mean, it was about 50-50 on the Mayflower. Most of those people were Brownists. We would call them Baptists today. And
really?
Yeah. About half of them had Geneva and the other half had King James, which you remember the King James Bible, it was the only one allowed to be printed in England. And so you had to get your Genevas after 1599. You had to get them from the Netherlands. So, and there was even a version of the Geneva or the King James that was published with Geneva notes in like 1672. So
funny, yeah. Those Geneva notes, by the way, for those of you who don't have a Geneva Bible, get a Geneva Bible or King James with Geneva notes, because those notes are heckin' based, man. So it's just like a little 4 or 5 word commentary here and there, but it is pretty excellent.
So we know these are the Bibles that came over on the Mayflower. Do we know like which Mayflower people had which Bible? Like, do we have it that?
Yeah, we do.
Really?
And the Massachusetts Bay Colony, remember, was very Calvinist. So that we tend to conflate the two. But the Mayflower had what we would consider Baptists on it, Brownists. And then the Massachusetts Bay Colony, being good Reformed people, it's going to have a lot of Genevas, when it was founded. So the Geneva was their preferred Bible. And
why was that? What were the differences between the Geneva and the King James? Because my pastor has a Geneva, so when he preaches, when it's his turn up on Sunday, he'll preach from the Geneva, and I'll be reading along, like in my King James or my ESV, one or the other. And when I'm reading along in the King James, it's like I'm not seeing a lot of differences between what he's saying and what I'm reading. Mostly it's just word order. Like, what were the differences to these people, why they would choose one or the other?
Well, that's the secret of the King James does have secrets, that people don't know about. Like remember Tyndale was burned at the stake. He was strangled and burned at the stake. He was the first big Bible translator. He got the New Testament and about half of the Old Testament done. And then when and the King of England, Henry, asked him to come to his court, and he declined because he didn't want to be controlled. He was over in Europe at this time. Anyway, he ended up getting betrayed by a guy with the last name Philip, who was a spendthrift. And anyway, it's a long story, but he was incarcerated for 16 months and abused by the Catholic Church over in the Netherlands. And then he was strangled and burned. Well, Tyndale's Bible was very popular, the parts that had been published. And then Anne Boleyn had a copy of.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
And Henry, you remember his famous last words were, "I hope the God opens the eyes of the King of England." So Henry later relented and said, well, we're going to have this great Bible. So that was the official translation put out by the Church of England, was the Great Bible. But it wasn't loved like the Tyndale versions. The Tyndale.
I was reading a little bit about the Great Bible. And so the Great Bible is like the first one that the English church puts out.
Mm-hmm.
But then by the time, you get people like Cromwell coming along, they're not using the Great Bible, which is the official Bible of the Church of England. They're using the Geneva.
Yeah. And
according to this one source I was reading.
Yeah. Yeah, that by far the most popular. Dryden, Shakespeare, all these people that lived in the 1500s, they were reading the Geneva Bible. It was by far the most popular. And the Tyndale's Bible was finally published in full with it was called the Matthew Bible. They had to create a pseudonym for it, and because it wasn't allowed. Tyndale had run afoul of the king.
Right.
But it was by far, this Matthew Bible was by far the most popular. And then when Bloody Mary reigned, Reformed Protestants fled to continental Europe, and Whittingham, while he was crossing France on horseback, he's the first person to put verse numbers in the Bible. And he's going to go on to Switzerland, Geneva, and he's going to, with all these Calvinist exiles, these Marian exiles, he's going to produce the Geneva Bible. And, it was by far the most popular. In 1560 is when the full thing was published. And then for 50 years, no Bible could touch it in popularity.
Right. So was the Geneva then the very first one to have verse numbers?
Yes, it was.
So also, that would explain some of its popularity, because that just makes it much more searchable, much more referenceable. So
yeah, it was done on horseback while Whittingham was crossing France to get to Switzerland. Yeah,
really. So he was sticking numbers in there while he was riding a horse.
Yeah,
he's like, let's put some numbers in here, make some sense out of this.
Yeah, he was. Bored riding on his horse. Hundreds of miles. So he's the first one to divide them. And it was a study Bible because it had the notes, that John Calvin helped work on, had the notes in the margins, it had verse numbers, and it even had pictures, woodcut.
Really?
Woodcut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason that the Geneva might have been the most popular wouldn't necessarily be because of the readings then so much as maybe the usability of it as an end user, as a reader, referenceability and things like that. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, and it went back to the original Greek and Hebrew. Tyndale was famous for this. As soon as he, he was learning Hebrew when he was, he wanted access to his Hebrew materials while he was in prison. Going back to the original means you get to skip the Roman Catholic Church and Latin when it comes to, authority of the scripture. And the Church of England guys, technically, they're Protestants, but we would consider them to be like Catholic priests. They were much more comfortable with the Latin Vulgate, right? So
Yeah.
the Great Bible had a lot of Vulgate readings in it because that's what they were comfortable with. I mean, even 50 years later, some of the King James translators were much more comfortable with the Bible in Latin than in English. So, Tyndale, the Geneva Boys, they went straight back to the original languages to sidestep Rome, and they produced them in idiomatic English, and it was just the superior translation. And then the King James comes about because King James, of course, is infuriated by these notes, because these notes are all Reformed, Commonwealth, Republican, way to go Egyptian handmaids for defying the Pharaoh and tyrants and all that. So he just wanted a Bible that didn't have notes. And
let the priest tell the men what to think, and not these Swiss reformers over there in Geneva.
Right. Let the Bible speak for itself. And so they were handed this. The King James translators had to do this. And they're like, okay, we need it to be as smooth as the Geneva, but we need to have some sort of edge so that people will adopt it and not keep buying these Genevas from the Netherlands. So their edge was,
at this point the Genevas are all being shipped in from overseas. So it wasn't illegal to own a Geneva at the time in England, right? It was just you couldn't print them there.
Right. What Tyndale, during his time, there were literally people being burned at the stake. You would go to prison for life for teaching your kids the Ten Commandments in English. It was, what they experienced was real persecution. But by the late 1500s, there was an open book culture in England. So even the Catholics, the Douay New Testament was being printed, and the Protestant publishers are like, well, I'm printing it to show you how superior our versions are, but it's an English translation, and it has an effect on the King James. That's the secret of the King James, is that it is a greatest hits compilation of all these rival Bibles that were out in the late 1500s, competing with the Geneva.
Right? So it was influenced, of course, by the Great Bible, which is the Bible of the English Church at the time. Because, Henry VIII commissions the Great Bible. King James commissions the King James Bible. So it's, of course, the successor. So it's got to be consistent there. And then it's competing directly with the Geneva for the English audience. And then it's competing against the Catholics with their Douay Rheims, or Douay Rheims, however you pronounce that. Yeah. So what you're saying is it kind of was influenced by these three translations that came before, that were all quite popular and quite well known at the time of its translation. So what was the thought process behind the King James? Was it just like, let's get together, let's get our best, brightest scholars, and let's nail this down exactly how we want it? Was that essentially the process, or was there more of a political?
You have the rules, like all of them are clergy in the Church of England, except for there was one polymath. He was just like a Renaissance man, and he was allowed to be part of it. I forget what his name was, but Lancelot Andrews was over the project. Like these guys, they had to compete with the Geneva. So, they would make a translation, and then they would go to a tavern, and then they would have it read out orally, and they would all sit there, drinking, and they're like, yeah, that sounds better, like the Geneva. Right. So they're actually trying to make it better than the Geneva with how it listens. But in order to beat the Geneva when it comes to scholarship, they're like, we need to make it more literal, right? So that's where, if you read the Geneva Bible, it's very Anglo-Saxon. There's hardly any like Latinate sort of English words in there. So, famously, 1 Corinthians 13 says love instead of charity, right? And the King James says charity. Well, where's the King James translators? Where are they getting charity? Well, it's the French word for caritas, which is the Latin Vulgate, which, it's Douay, the Douay New Testament used charity, right, for agape. They're all translating agape originally. So they're like, well, we're going to make these technical differences between love, to make better scholarship, to make a better translation for scholars.
It seems charity is even just the more popular word for love at the time, or at least that
Yeah,
kind of
so
love.
so Sean is holding up a book there by Jonathan Edwards,
Jonathan
Charity
Edwards.
and Its Fruit. And of course, Jonathan Edwards, he's coming along a bit later, and he would have been reading the King James Version his entire life. We've talked about this before on the show, where just like the English in the King James actually had an effect on the language spoken by the people. So the Geneva was, as you were saying, Musonius, this Anglo-Saxon, very, very raw and vulgar language, and they kind of flowered it up in the King James, and then that had an effect on language to the point where by the time Jonathan Edwards comes along, he's using the word charity to mean love.
It does not mean giving free stuff to strangers who are in need. That's not what charity means. It has become, because it's the French word for caritas, caritate in Latin, which was the Latin Vulgate's rendering of agape. Okay, so look at the King James. The King James is actually more archaic than the Geneva, which was published 50 years before. It gets that hyper archaism from the Great Bible. It gets the basic English word order, that's very pithy and sounds good, from the Geneva, and then it gets technical vocabulary from the Douay, because it's trying to bring English-speaking Catholics into the Church of England, too.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and this was at the time, when the churches in England is trying to consolidate, and build bridges, after a lot of this bloodletting has gone on, trying to bring people together and be like, okay, let's all get together under one big tent. And that seems to be the project of the King James as you're expressing it.
Yes, yeah, it's but so that bringing in Reformed English speakers and Catholic English speakers, bringing everyone into the Church of England, and Geneva was the popular. Everyone had a copy of that one at home, and it read very well. So,
I had a question about the Geneva Bible, because I remember me and my buddy Thaddeus, I was mentioning him, he's in the chat right now. We went and saw some Kirk Cameron movie that was in theaters, and at the end of it, or maybe it was like the very beginning in like the advertisements time, he's like, "This is a great Bible. It's the Geneva Bible." And he's like freaking out because he's like, "Oh, this is so cool that they're talking about the Geneva Bible." But I had never heard of it at that point. This is like many years ago, and so I started reading it. I was like, well, I want to try out this Geneva Bible, and so I was just kind of like, is this even modern English? Because you'd said it's very Anglo-Saxon, but I mean, when you read it, it's like it's like when I read the old Robin Hood ballads. Like, it's not modern, like what I would call modern English, but
yeah, that's what you really need. The Tola Lege, you need modern orthography to really understand how it is early modern English. Just it's a lot more closer to modern English than Le Morte d'Arthur, which is usually considered like the first early modern English work. But so the King James Bible is early modern English. If you have thous, if you have hath, and hast, thou hast, and that's all early modern English. And the vocabulary choice, the Geneva, is Anglo-Saxon. So when the fig tree casteth her untimely figs, it's untimely, which means too early in the King James, which is archaic. It's just green. It's in the Geneva, the fig tree casteth her green figs. So they use simple Anglo-Saxon words a lot more than the King James, which is using more Latinate words and more archaic words that had already fallen out of use, like untimely. So it was archaic. When the King James Bible emerged, it was already archaic.
But I mean, when I read the Geneva Bible, there's there's words that are spelled in a way that nobody on either side of the pond spells them anymore. Like, I guess that's
orthography. Yeah, but the King James is the same way, right? So the U's and V's are all different. You'll have you still have Y's. That's probably what's throwing you off, is that the Geneva Bible used these printer abbreviations. So you'll, instead of they'll use like instead of the word "the," it'll look like a T on top of a Y or something. Those are
Yeah.
abbreviations, like
So
ampersand.
like every town just about across the South has some ye old English bakery, and it's referred to by the locals as ye old English bakery. But the people who would have used that print setting, who would have used a YE, they would have actually been reading that as the, because that Y was a shorthand for the TH. And so there is no such thing as ye old English bakery. It's the old English bakery.
Right.
But,
The 26 letters of the Roman alphabet that came over on the first printing presses into England. Well, they didn't have eth, and they didn't have thorn, and they didn't have ash, right? Like these letters that were created for the English language in the Middle Ages. So they had to use what they had, and yog, became their symbol for eth and thorn. And so that's where, and then the printers abbreviated a lot, and that's confusing. So we still have ampersand, which means and that's the only printer's abbreviation that we've kept. But there was it looked like ye, and that meant the, and then there were some others. A capital D with a cross slash, that means day or of, so you would sometimes see that. So Tolle Lege Press has produced a Geneva Bible with modern orthography, and having modern orthography really lets you read it, without stumbling. But King James orthography is rough too. If you've ever bought a facsimile of the King James, the U's and V's are reversed. There's that can be confusing. So
interesting. Sean, did you have some more questions about that, or?
Well, we were talking about which people on the Mayflower. This was from like when we first started, but because I'd recently found out that Thomas Rogers is a direct ancestor of mine, and he was a separatist. So, based on that information, which Bible do you think he would have had?
It depends upon when he lived. Help me out with when he lived, because
looking at 1571 to 1621, he died in the first winter there.
So he would have had a Geneva then, just because the
100%.
King James hadn't come about yet, or at least it hadn't become popular in the New World yet.
The Geneva was first published in 1560, and in its complete form with Apocrypha, because they're competing against the Catholic Vulgate Bible. And then 1599, the reason why there's so many 1599 Genevas is because it was illegal to print them in the 1600s in England. So a lot of pirate presses would just put 1599 on.
So it's like, nice. It might be 1632, but you are not going to change your typeset from 1599, because then you can sell it in England.
Right. And then that one does not have Apocrypha, but it is a second edition. So if you look at the argument, which is the introduction to Geneva, the 1560 will say these things, and then it lists three of these things that it wants you to keep in mind. Well, the 1599 says these three things, right? So it is a second edition. They've gone back through and tried to correct everything and make it more exact. So Tolle Lege, I think, sells the 1599 in modern orthography. So.
Yeah, I can find it. Tolle Lege 1599 Geneva Bible on I'm looking at it on Amazon right now. You can get a beautiful leather bound for $180. You can get it for free on Kindle, and then you can get various other versions for various different prices. But it is available, if not particularly affordable.
Yeah, I'm a respecter of the Geneva Bible, and if you were creating your colony of based Reformed Puritans, I would expect you to have your Geneva in there, and your Calvinist, institutes, and all that needs to be in your library. And I'm not a King James onlyist, but I am a King James supremacist, and but I have a lot of respect for the Geneva, and like I said, it sometimes reads If you read it modern orthography, it sometimes reads smoother than the King James. And but I also respect, a lot of work went, the Catholics had their butts beat by the King James Bible, and so they spent centuries working on the Douay Rheims to try to have an early modern English of their own. And but it comes from the Vulgate. It does not come from Greek and Hebrew. So, but those are the competitors to the King James.
So just right now, in kind of, as it were, the Christian alt-right or far right or anons on Twitter, whatever you want to call it, there's this big debate going on about the Septuagint and how the Septuagint is, the better Old Testament. And, some people saying, there's no good English Septuagint, but maybe the Latin Vulgate is closer to the original Septuagint. What are the disparate readings, and what's your take on the different readings there in the Douay Rheims coming from the Latin Vulgate versus, these ones that are coming from, the King James Version and all the modern versions after that coming from the original Hebrew, as it were, which is actually the Masoretic, which may or may not be the original Hebrew. What's your take on the different readings? Are you just like, okay, King James, good enough, or do you have a spicy take on that?
No, I mean, I am a Septuagint respecter and enjoyer, and
okay.
Yeah, I love the Septuagint, and I always keep up because one day we're gonna. There have been several translations of the Septuagint, and famously, the first one ever done in English was done by an American, Charles Thompson, who was the secretary to the as a Continental Congress. He was the man that invited George Washington to come be the first president, and then his career was over because he had too many powerful enemies. But he spent the last 20 years of his life translating the Septuagint into English, and it's called the Thompson with no P. All right, so it's Thomson. He was a good, Presbyterian that came from Northern Ireland. His dad died en route, and he was orphaned. And great American founder story. One of the lesser known founders. But the Thompson translation is actually a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. But the Breton translation is the most famous, and it's in the public domain now. It was done 40 years later. And now there's a Lexham, which was done by a computer. So, and it reads pretty smooth. There's Nets, for those academics, the Nets translation, which is based upon the RSV. So there's a lot of Septuagint translations now. And I keep up with it. I enjoy the Septuagint. The secret with the Septuagint is even all those Protestants that had the Masoretic, they had like the Leningrad Codex, a copy of it or whatever. You still need the Septuagint to understand what you're reading, because the entire Hebrew corpus of literature was represented by the Old Testament. We might have some Paleo Hebrew inscriptions in the Middle East, but that's it. It's the Old Testament and those inscriptions. And to understand, what these words mean, I mean, you can go to their cousin languages like Aramaic or Arabic and guess what these words mean. But, you also have ancient Greek, which has a huge corpus of literature and dictionaries and what it means. And so you need the Septuagint to understand the Masoretic, and you always have. The King James translators, they had the Complutensian Polyglot, the first edition of the Septuagint ever published. All these Bible publishers had a copy of the Septuagint, or these translators, they all did. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't follow it super closely.
Sections mean without the Septuagint, like the famous section where they lose a battle. I think it's in 2 Samuel. And they want to know, what happened, and it's the honeycomb, right? And there's a whole section involving Uman and Thuman where they cast lots to find out who's to blame for thus losing this battle, and that doesn't make any sense in the Hebrew, right? You got to read the Greek to understand. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Lights and rights are the name of Uman and Thuman. Okay, I got you, right? Well, it's that way with the whole Hebrew Old Testament. Like, you need to go to the Septuagint sometimes to find out what you're reading. So, if you ask me. I don't know if that's too spicy or whatever, but they all had it.
So we have had a Hebrew scholar on the show previously, and his take is exactly opposite of yours. He believes that vowel points were inspired. The Old Testament is deep enough for you to get the entire context there. And I don't want to misrepresent him, but or overstate his case too strongly. But I'm very sympathetic to the idea that it was necessary to have the Greek language influencing our understanding, just because of how much deeper and wider that language is.
Yes, and remember we have the New Testament, right? So the apostles felt the same way. Okay, so the apostles, when Jesus goes into the synagogue for the first time and opens the scroll of Isaiah, which I think is Isaias in the King James, yeah, it's Isaias. What the part of Isaiah he's reading from is from the Septuagint. It's not the Masoretic. And when you compare quotes in the New Testament to, are they quoting the Masoretic or are they quoting the Septuagint? Most of the time they're quoting the Septuagint. They quote both, right? So it's not, they're not Septuagint onlyists by any means, but they are Septuagint, most of the time, majoritarians. It's overwhelming how often they quote the Septuagint.
I think when we had Joseph on, our Hebrew guy, he, I think a big influence in his thought and many people's thought is that if you are a received text guy or confessional text or whatever name that they put on it, like you like the King James because the manuscripts that the King James is translated from are the received texts, the received readings that we have. If you're that guy, then you kind of have to be a Hebrew supremacist because there's a lot of readings that we have in the Textus Receptus that are just simply like not majority readings, or they're not the earliest readings, they're not the best readings. Sometimes they're the what was it? James White had a debate with a Textus Receptus guy where they only talked about this one verse, and it was like a random verse, but it was one where in the King James the word is like I don't know, it was like economy versus some other word, and the King James uses the reading that's only in like one manuscript. And so it became the one that everyone's, oh, this is the received text. But before that, it was only in this one random manuscript, and the translators happened to have that manuscript. So I think that generally will cause, like, if you're especially if you're King James only, not just like a King James supremacist, you're going to be a Hebrew guy because that's what they leaned on, those readings.
Well, the Hebrew is going to have information that the Septuagint doesn't, like the word plays. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in there that you need both, is my contention. Now, if you're an ortho bro, you're probably a Septuagint supremacist. It's like, do we even need the Hebrew? Yeah. But I'm telling you, you need both because there's a lot of theological investigation that you can only do. And the Septuagint admits it is a translation. It is a translation, and really the Septuagint is only the first 5 books of Moses, technically speaking. That was the one done by the 72 scholars, according to legend. But the rest of the Old Testament, you have 2 different manuscript traditions, at least. You have more, really, with the later ones, like you got Symmachus and Theodotion. You got their versions. But really, there's an Antiochian Septuagint and there's an Alexandrian, just like with the New Testament, where they're always arguing about, Byzantine text versus Alexandrian. Well, here it's, instead of Byzantine, it's Antiochian. The Septuagint, as quoted by the early church fathers of the Eastern, of the Eastern Roman Church. And like Theodotion and such. Well, their quotes match up with what's called the Antiochian text, and real scandal in the English language that a lot of English scholars may not understand is that the ecclesiastical text is Antiochian, right? And it was only ever published once in the West, and that's Complutensian Polyglot. Almost every Septuagint you've ever read or was translated into English ultimately comes from Vaticanus, All right, the third Septuagint printed in the West by Western publishing houses was the 16th Septuagint, which Protestants often call the Roman Septuagint, and that's the one that Thompson, Brenton, everyone based their translations on that, and that one comes mainly from Vaticanus, a book, one of the most ancient Bibles. It's called B or Beta. When you talk about these ancient manuscripts, there's Alexandrinus, there's Vaticanus, and there's Sinaiticus, right? Those are the three oldest ones. And you run across this in New Testament manuscript arguments all the time, where modern critical scholars like to use these three ancient witnesses, to determine what the original verses were, right? And that's the criticism that King James people, Textus Receptus people, NKJV, that they're like, we're sticking with our Byzantine text. Thank you very much. And the Textus Receptus was a Byzantine manuscript. It is not a Byzantine majority. There's about 1,000 translatable differences between it and an absolute Byzantine majority. But it's so close that these are mere quibbles if you ever go through them. Farstott, the editor of the NKJV, he lists them all, and if you ever go through them, you're like, man, this is a mere quibble. So it's the King James New Testament is a Byzantine, New Testament. So,
well, that's a really important point that you made. That when we say the Septuagint, there is no one the Septuagint. It's there's different manuscript traditions within what we call the Septuagint. And it bothers me that that's become the new thing where people are like, oh, we just need the Septuagint. That's what, that's what the early church fathers had. Well, it's like, well, they had disparate readings within even that tradition.
Same goes for the Latin Vulgate. You think it's one thing. Okay. Well, yeah, St. Jerome, who had access to Hebrew scriptures that we don't have, right? And the old Septuagint manuscripts. Well, when he oversaw that translation, that's what makes it so valuable, even to us Protestants and Ortho bros, is that, well, he's a witness to all these manuscripts that we don't have anymore. So it's interesting to read it. I mean, it's you need to have it. If a serious Bible scholar should probably have a copy of it. And by the way, it was the official Bible, for 1,000 years in Western Christendom. Yeah. So, it was the Holy Ghost wrong, bros? Is he wrong?
But yeah, because I've heard people make the argument for King James onlyism. Well, it was the Bible of the church for several hundred years, so we can't leave it now because it's obviously God had a plan with it. And to me, you hear these arguments and you're thinking, well, dude, all of these apply equally to the Church of Rome and the Latin Vulgate. If you're going to make these arguments for, well, God used the scripture this way in such a great way, then that kind of begs the question, as it were.
Yeah, and because I'm a nerd and I never got to my point, the point is that before the Latin Vulgate, there were Old Latin, Vetus Latina translations from the Septuagint. And
these were before Jerome? Or?
Yeah, they were before Jerome. And they keep showing up in the manuscript tradition of the Latin Vulgate. And you're like, what happened? And it's like, what happened was whenever a Bible was damaged and they needed to repair it and replace leaves, they would just use whatever Latin Bible they had at hand, these monks. And
because it's all pre-printing press.
Right. So
if you've got a page missing, you can just kind of pillage that old Bible that you've got on the shelf over there, shove this page in and be like, okay, that'll cover the damaged area.
Right. And so these Vetus Latina, and then 2 centuries later, a monk records all that and thinks it's the Latin Vulgate. So all the manuscripts of, the Roman Catholic Church, Latin Vulgate, they all have these Vetus Latina readings mixed in. And that's what's happened to the Septuagint, where you have Antiochian and then you'll have Alexandrian readings mixed in, right? So, but thankfully, modern scholars can sit down with all these manuscripts and figure out what are the traditions. And there's at least 2 with the Latin Bible. You have Vetus Latina and Vulgate. So
interesting, very cool. So the next thing, so as it were, the title of the show is, English Bible versions in America.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
So,
I'm such a nerd. I've gone too far afield.
No, I think it's interesting, and around the 40-minute mark, which is right about where we are, I wanted to kind of focus on this next family of Bibles that kind of come into existence. So you have the Church of England has had the KJV for a long time. That's been their standard. And then the King of England authorizes for an update to the King James. And from that, you get this English standard version, which then becomes, a standard across the English church, which I don't know. I'm not in England. I've not been to a church in England. I don't know if that's what they read on the pulpit or if, it kind of fell out of favor and they went back to the King James. But tell us about, this English Standard Version and, its relation to the American Standard. What was the origin of these Bibles? Where did these come from?
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, Oxford and Cambridge, they got in trouble with, modernizing the King James text too much. So in 1833, they decided to share a text, and they just called it the AV, the Authorized Version. So Authorized Version is a very English way of referring to it. And so when they revised it, it's the only revision that's ever been authorized by the Church of England. Formally, it's called the Revised Version. We often put an E in front of it, because the Revised Version, what it was, starting in the 1870s, they put together committees, both in America, the United States, and England, of the best Greek scholars, Greek and Hebrew scholars, and Schaff, Philip Schaff was the editor of the American committee, and I think it's Westcott, of Westcott and Hort fame, was the chair of the English committee. And so for years, through secret correspondence, with couriers, because they didn't want, anyone reading this stuff, they worked on revising the Bible verse by verse to make it more literal and closer to and more modern at the same time. There's about 800 in the 66 books of the Protestant canonical King James. There's about 800 places where the language confuses people a little bit, and so they needed to fix that. And they needed to modernize it with, like the New Testament famously uses Greek instead of the Hebrew, right? So it's Isaias instead of Isaiah, it's Elias instead of Elijah. That's the low-hanging fruit. Benjamin Blaney himself, back in 1769, had introduced its into the Bible, right? So
yeah, because before Blaney, you would have weird sentences where someone would refer to, the dog he, and placed.
Right. Right. And
if you're saying a man, take a sample sentence, say the man placed the fruit upon the table, but then you want to replace it in modern English. If you want to drop those nouns and replace them with, I forgot what they're called. But anyway, if you want to replace those with the word it, you would say he placed it on that, or he placed it upon it. He placed the fruit on the table. Well, in the gendered English, you would have said, he placed her on him.
Right.
And to a moderner, you hear he placed her on him, and it's like, this is, weird. Like, where did he?
This got spicy.
Did he just hand a child to another person, or like what's going on? No, we're still talking about a fruit and a table. And so, I think it was Blaney, right, who came along and he's like, no, we're going to put, we're going to start modernizing this English, get rid of the gendered pronouns, and just start putting these things in a more understandable way as English developed and dropped those gendered pronouns, start using the neuter pronouns in the Bible as well.
Right. All inanimate objects no longer have gender in English, right? But in European languages, they do, right? So in German, if a lamp is standing on the floor, it's a he. It's die Lampe if it's on a table. It's a she, right? You use the pronoun she. So French and Spanish, same way. They only have two genders. They don't have neuter. But Persian and English are the only Indo-European languages that got rid of grammatical gender for inanimate objects. And there are places and it reads very poetically, mostly in the King James, but there are places where it causes confusion, like you just pointed out, right? Like the salt loses its savor is what Blaney changed his savor to, right? His
Mm-hmm.
taste. So, because it's a little confusing, to so
Yeah.
any,
Whose savor did this salt lose?
yeah, right. What were you talking about? So you have to introduce more its. You have to regularize the names to their standard form. Not one Hebrew, one Greek, just one Hebrew. There's all these like low hanging fruit the revised committee had to take care of, but they were also wanted to use the best scholarship. With all the latest manuscripts, Codex Sinaiticus had been discovered, etc. And
Mm-hmm.
so the both American and English committees, worked on this for years. And in 1881, they produced the New Testament. And in 1885, they produced the Old Testament of the Revised Version. And it's just usually called the RV. Okay. And the Americans are like, well, there's some more stuff we wanted to put in there. And they said, all right, I'll tell you what, we have 15 years of monopoly on this revised version that we worked on together. And then you guys can produce your own version. And that's why the
Mm-hmm.
American Standard came out in 1901. Okay.
Okay.
And yeah, the revised version and American Standard are very close to each other. And they're both updates of the King James. They introduce new vocabulary. King James famously only has about like 8,000 words in it, and that get reused a lot. So they introduced 50 to 100 new words like shuddering instead of just trembling. And that's where the standard vocabulary comes from these introduced new words into the corpus of the Bible. And it is very literal. There are more literal translations like Young's literal or Rotherham's emphasized, but those are almost unreadable. Like interlinear translations, you cannot read for pleasure. Okay, you're just reading to get back to the original languages. Well,
and they don't make a good pulpit Bible either. I mean, I have a Young's literal on my phone, and I sometimes use it because I'm not a Greek or Hebrew scholar. I'll sometimes go into Young's and see what it says. And it is sometimes enlightening, but what I've discovered, I don't utilize it very much. I end up going to the German Luther text more often because I can read and understand German. I find that the Young's isn't actually that helpful when I'm trying to discover, okay, like if there's a conflict about, what is being discussed here, because the language is just kind of almost too verbose.
Yeah, like the English, the King James translators, like every translator, has turned some Greek phrases into idioms or Greek idioms into single words, etc. That's where the Young's really shines, is where you're like, there's this one word in English, and then you go back to the Greek and it's like, oh, it's 3 or 4 words, because it's an idiom in Greek.
Yeah.
So that's where it really shines, because it's so word for word that you get to see that there's a bunch more words in the sentence, but it's an idiom that's been rendered as a single English word, right? Well, the Revised Version and American Standard versions are the most literal that are still readable. Like nothing compares to them. Even modern translations does not compare to them in literalness. Only word for word, translation. Only the literal translations that are almost unreadable can beat them when it comes to literalness. So they're both extremely literal, and close Bible students have often appreciated them. When you're studying these ancient languages, you often have a pony text, what's called a pony, and that is a little horse you can ride before you get a big enough boy where you can ride a real horse, right? So having a very literal English translation like Young's helps you with the Greek and Hebrew.
Right. Yeah. So when we're talking about idioms and things like that, I just wanted to go into, for the people who are not nerdy about this and are not familiar with it, like what is the difference between dynamic equivalence and formal equivalence? You have the translation of idioms, like you said, they translate a Greek idiom into one word, or sometimes they'd substitute a Greek idiom for an English idiom, and which is not literal at all, but it's certainly kind of portraying the idea that the original idiom was trying to communicate. So what is dynamic equivalence? in these translations we've discussed so far, the Geneva, the King James, and now the newly arrived, revised versions, what were their approaches to their equivalences? What were they pursuing?
Yeah, well, the King James tried to be more literal, which is word for word, than the Geneva, and that's where the italics come from. If you
Mm-hmm.
see the King James with italics in it, whenever they had to add an English word to make a smooth sentence, they would make it in italics to say it was added. So
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to outcompete the Geneva when it comes to scholarship. Well, the dynamic translation is thought for thought. So instead of worrying about having one English word that always represents, one Greek word, we're going to look at the whole sentence and its thought and translate it first and foremost, using
Mm-hmm.
as many or as few words as we want. And so the famous dynamic translations like I think the NIV is probably the best, but there's many more. Like the Message is very dynamic. It's
Maybe a little too dynamic.
yeah. The
Yeah.
New English Bible, no one's ever heard of it, but it is very dynamic, and
Mm-hmm.
those can be fun. Those can be
Mm-hmm.
fun, but they're not good scholarship. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, literal translations try to go word for word, so that you can, find this one word in the original Greek and trace it. Now, if you do that, you'll find that many times, there's two or three English words that are used to translate it, depending. We used love. We were talking about love earlier. Well, there is no English Bible that says God is charity, even though the original Greek is agape, right? It's always God
Mm-hmm.
is love, right? So, but they decided to switch to charity for 1 Corinthians 13, whereas Geneva decided to keep love, the generic Anglo-Saxon word. So, both love and charities translate the same word, agape, in the King James. So you'll if you go to Strong's Concordance, you'll often see that 60% of the time they'll use this one English word for word, and then 20% this, 20% that, that sort of thing. So that's the difference between word for word and thought for thought.
And then, so about this time, you've got the revised version in England. You've got this 15-year embargo on the Americans. Like, okay, we're going to have 15 years of this, and then y'all can get started. What was the book that they came out with after that 15-year embargo?
Yeah, the American Standard Version is what they came out with, and that's where the term standard comes from. Americans were fierce pirates, intellectual pirates of British works, right? Dictionaries, they just pirated the heck out of them. Didn't give any royalties to the original Englishmen, and they were real snooty about it too. Like, we're Republicans, we do what we want. So,
disrespecters of copyright law. Yeah, the
right.
copyright law relations between England and America. For those who are interested, it is a fascinating read just in and of itself, all the way up to the modern day, even with modern books being released back and forth. The way that the transatlantic copyright law works is very convoluted and very, very silly sometimes.
Yeah, so the American Standard, they copyrighted their Bible because there's going to be a lot of pirated versions of the English Revised Version swimming around America, and they wanted to be able to control the quality. So they copyrighted. That's where the standard comes from, and it created this standard Bible lineage. Because the ASV is so literal, and it is a little bit smoother than the English Revised. It famously uses Jehovah every time that the Lord in small caps appears in the King James. For instead of the tetragrammaton, using 4 letters, like modern literal translations do, they use Jehovah. So it's in there over 6,000 times.
Wow.
You could see why this Bible was popular with the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they use his name. But the American Standard Bible came out in 1901, and there's nothing more literal. So there's been at least two direct translations of it into modern English. One is the Revised Standard Version. The standard comes from American Standard. That was done in 1952 by Weigel, Bruce Metzger, a lot of famous people. and famous Bible scholars in the 20th century. But like I said to you offline earlier, you cannot beat the Greek and Hebrew scholarship of the late 19th century. There was just more of these guys running around. They were all brilliant, you know. And so the American Standard Version, if you're going for a more literal and you don't mind a little early modern English grammar, it's which actually enhances, you know, because remember Greek, you know, will make these distinctions too between singular and plural you and all that, which you can do in early modern English. You can't do it in modern, right? So the American Standard Version, because it's so literal, people like to use it to make their own modern versions. So the World English Bible, which is a public domain Bible from the get-go, is the guy used a computer over at ebible.org to just update the language of the American Standard Version. The Revised Standard Version's like, we're going to update the language and we're going to make it a little smoother. So it's a little bit closer to dynamic. It's not quite as literal as the ASV. But that's where, and then all the standard Bibles come from that. So the English Standard Version came about because the RSV famously, it allowed Jews on the translation committee, and wouldn't you know it, every single prophecy in the Old Testament that prophesies Christ is a little weaker now, including, you know, Isaiah 7:14. You know, they say young woman instead of virgin. Septuagint is, very plain. It's Parthenos, just like Parthenon. Athena was a virgin goddess. Her temple is called the Parthenon. Parthenos is the Greek word for virgin in the Septuagint 7:14, Isaiah 7:14. Well, because of this, it prevented the RSV from ever becoming mainstream to evangelicals, but it was appreciated by the mainliners, right? So Trump, when he got sworn in as president, he did it on an RSV that his mom gave him. And most people will say the RSV, it's kind of the opposite. With the ASV, I remember Spurgeon said, no, it was the English Revised Version. He said that these gentlemen were strong on Greek, but weak on English. Okay. And
which was their first language.
yeah. And with the RSV, I would say it's a little bit stronger. It's got the opposite problem. It's strong on English. It has this understated elegance to the way it uses English without being too idiomatic. That, you know, the ESV is like, man, we want that, but we want it to be good. We want it to be orthodox and Bible believing. We want it done by Bible believers. So the ESV is like, well, let's rescue the RSV and bring it back into the manuscript majority and bring it back into, you know, Bible believing Christians, and, you know, make a RSV for Bible believing Christians. That's where it comes from, right? The ESV. And the ESV has been getting closer to the manuscript tradition of fundamentalists, you know, closer to the Textus Receptus, because, you know, the Gideons are like, well, we would love to put the ESV if the hotel owners want it. Well, we'll do it, but you have to put these verses back in from the Textus Receptus. And they're like, yes, sir. You know, so the latest ESV is a lot closer, you know, to the Textus Receptus than the RSV was. The RSV, the 50s and 60s were the high watermark of critical text translations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had some stuff I wanted to. I know Jeff is probably squirming in his seat, me interrupting his vibe, but I had some thoughts as we were going through this. I think a lot of people listening, maybe not a lot, but some people listening might not fully understand that there's two separate topics. What I would consider two separate topics that you're bringing up here. So there's like manuscript traditions, and then there's how do you translate once you've decided which one. And so what we're kind of going in and out of here is deciding which reading in the original language we even translate from. And then once that's decided, how do we translate from that into English? So it's two separate, I would consider it two separate topics, but I mean, when we're talking about how do we get an English Bible, those two things are the major pieces that go into it. So for people who might be confused about why we keep going in and out.
Yeah, that's one of the features that when a new translation is done, they want to show off like their textual criticism, their knowledge of textual studies. So they'll tell you what their textual basis is, and for most of the 20th century, they wanted to be as critical as possible until about the 1970s, and then everything switched around. Where you have the revenge of the conservatives. So the New King James Version, okay, is a modernization of the King James, but they skipped right over the standard Bibles. Unlike the RSV or the World English Bible or so many other modern versions, they're like, we're going to skip the ASV and we're going to go straight back to the King James and just modernize that language, right? So, and that's 1970s. Why are they doing that? Well, for two reasons. The King James is based upon a Byzantine manuscript for the New Testament, famously. And they want to preserve that tradition, and avoid all the critical texts, Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and that's so there. It's a return to tradition, return with a V, for the manuscript tradition, and they are skipping all the new vocabulary that was added by the English and American revisers. Before the ASV was published, it's often referred to as just the ARV, the American Revised Version, but they copyrighted and standard. That's where the word standard comes from for Bibles. Some people just called it the Standard Bible, the ASV, because they copyrighted that term. But if you see standard in a name, it all is descended from the ASV. Sir.
Right. So when you go into Lifeway and you see all these different ones, and it's like New American Standard, English Standard, any of those ones that have the word standard in it, those are daughter traditions from this one that was developed in the 1950s.
Yeah, the American Standard is 1901, and the Revised Standard Version is 1952. Weigel, Metzger are the big names associated with it, Bruce Metzger. And then all the mainliners liked it. All the evangelicals are like, I don't know about that, with the RSV. But it had very elegant English. So in the 1970s, there was this, they went two different directions with it. The next generation of RSV. One group of academics and liberal mainliners, they're like, well, we want a Bible that is more gender neutral, etc. And that's where the new Revised Standard Version comes from. But, they went to the left. And then, one group of scholars, one generation later, are like, man, we like the RSV, but we want to go more conservative with it. And that's the ESV. So you got the New Revised Standard Version, the English Standard Version. They are descended from the Revised Standard Version, which is itself a modernization of the American Standard Version. That's the standard family of Bibles. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So John MacArthur famously uses an NASB, which is the New American Standard.
Oh, so, right. I forgot about that branch. Yeah. In the 1970s, they created the New American Standard Bible, which is just a modernized ASV. That's what it is, right?
Yeah. So it's just building off of the ASV again, but with more modern English.
Right. What they liked about the ASV was how literal it was, but yet it was still readable, unlike the literal translations. So let's modernize it and let's put it out. And that way we can tell people, hey, when you're doing your Greek studies, use the NASB and it's going to be good. You're going to like it.
And that was a point that I had made before we started recording. I was saying that when I was doing Greek, in our second year, capstone project was to translate 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and me and a buddy were comparing, and he was like, man, you get like word for word NASB, and there's just something about that, whatever philosophical translation idea that group of translators had, I agree with it. Whatever it is, it's very literal. It's to the point where I was saying that I can sometimes read in the NASB and know what the Greek reading looks like, because they will keep really what sounds really weird in English things. They will keep that from the Greek. So it reads kind of weird for people, but if you know the Greek, you're like, oh, okay, I know exactly what that's saying. It's a weird thing that I have for the NASB. So.
That's how good those scholars were. Westcott, in England, Schaff in America, these were the best of the best. And they worked on this because they were trying to replace the King James Bible. This was supposed to be, King James, the 400th year anniversary replacement, and it did not work. The revised version, and it was because of their manuscript choices, it scared people off. And also, it's a little wooden. It's more wood. It's not quite as poetic and idiomatic as the King James.
Yeah,
yeah. So, but the English Revised Version, in order to beat the King James, there's if you're interested in it, there's 3 or 4 different public domain Bibles. You can find them on Google Books or archive.org, where it has both, right? So there's a parallel Bible that has King James and RV next to each other. Right, throughout the whole Bible, canonical 66 Protestant Bible. The RV, the committee finally put out an Apocrypha in 1894. So there's a complete RV Bible with Apocrypha put out in 1895. And in England, that's for free online. The 2 version, a lot of old some people, that's their favorite study Bible, is the 2 version, where it's the King James in the middle as a regular Bible, and then all the alternate choices that make the RV different are in the margins, right? So it makes the Bible a lot smaller and easier to handle, and you have alternate readings, which was very common in the 19th century to have alternate readings in the margin, like Wilbur reference Bibles that way, that sort of thing. So it's a lot of people like that. And remember, it's going to be the Lord 6,000 times. It's not going to be, Jehovah, as American Standard is. And then finally, there's the Interlinear Bible of 1906, because they're making the RV and King James go head to head, and they're trying to replace the King James, and they can't do it. The 1906 Interlinear it's the King James, but every time that it deviates from the RV, there's a little line put in there, and in smaller font, like 6-point font, they have the King James on the bottom of the line, and they have the RV on top. And some people they're like, that's a great study Bible. When it came back, Oxford reprinted it, and they added American Standard readings, right? So the interesting thing about the modern Interlinear Bible is that you can really say, I have 3 Bibles in my hand, right? King James, Revised Version, and American Standard Version, all in my hand. One hand, one book. So, and there's no Apocrypha, but ebible.org, if you like public domain Bibles, that's a great place to go. And I believe Adam Boyd, who is a Bible translator, who's translated the Bible into New Guinea languages, he grew up on the American Standard Version. He likes it as a Bible translator, and he made a Byzantine corrected version for all you guys that like the Byzantine text. And he took the RV Apocrypha, and he added Hades and a few of the choices that make ASV separate from RV. And he added it to it so that the American Standard could have its own Apocrypha, right? So that's all for free. He refuses to take any money for it. You can find it on Amazon if you want a hard copy, or you can get the EPUBs and PDFs off of ebible.org. It's called the American Standard Byzantine Text, BT. ASVBT. And like I said, World English Bible, Michael, what is his name? Michael Johnson, I want to say. He's just a computer nerd who back in the 90s is like, I'm going to update the ASV into modern English and put it in the public domain so there's no copyright issues. And that's what the World English Bible is. And there is a way to get a hard copy of it, but it's going to be very cheaply printed, gentlemen. So... Yeah. Anyway,
do you plan on getting into the various NASBs?
No, I am not an expert. I am not an expert on the NASB, and I would not want to insult anyone with how little I know about it. 95, they redid it. Of course, a lot of these Bibles depends upon what year. Everyone's like, I like the NIV 84, but I don't like the 2011 or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, NIV went a particular route where they started using gender neutral, and sometimes I believe they did a version where they used feminine articles for God, and so they really went off the deep end more recently. But at least I theoretically, right at first, they were actually trying to do a good job. I mean, when I was a kid, my first Bible, if you don't count the little tiny one that you get when you're baptized, my first Bible was an NIV, and that's what I read as a little kid. And then we started going to IFB churches, and after that, it was just like KJV only, up until pretty much the point where I became an adult. So, it has its little fan club, people who certainly liked the NIV, especially 30 years ago. I think the liberal editions that they came out with kind of killed even the theoretically good versions that came before, to where they've fallen out of favor because of the editions that they did.
They backed the wrong horse. Like the NIV, there is a place for idiomatic, or dynamic Bible translation.
Especially for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was the idea behind the NIV. The originator was like, well, I want a Bible I can read to children, and that's where the idea came from. And they had the market cornered on idiomatic, dynamic Bible translations, and they've ruined it by backing the wrong horse. You went left, you zigged when you should have zagged, man.
Yeah.
Right. You chose to go along with the devil and all this gender crap, and you will reap the whirlwind.
Yeah.
You should have known better.
If you were doing that in academia, you would have done just fine. But trying to do that in the church is just that's the true church is never going to stand for that.
Right. And then they were predicting the future. You got to predict the future whenever you make a product, because you want to sell all these and they thought, we're going to go this is the way that the world's going, and it's like, boom, you're wrong. There's been a huge reaction to all this crap, and thank the Lord. But this gender neutral stuff goes back to the 70s. The New Revised Standard Version, if you want a gender neutral Bible, go get it. And you'll have the understated elegance of the RSV, and you'll have it in your liberal form that you want, your liberal academic, I don't believe in God form. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I'm being mean. But look, but I want a believer's Bible. Thank you very much. And I don't want people that do not believe Jesus Christ was the Messiah translating my Bible. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what the RSV famously did, and it messed up, and it ruined its marketability by doing that. The RSV would have replaced everybody had it been the ESV back in 1952, right? It would be the translation of the 20th century, but they messed up.
Yeah. It's like you said, they zigged when they should have zagged. They had the opportunity there. All right. Well, I want to continue this conversation, but we do have some comments I want to get to. So we'll read some comments, and then we'll get back into picking up probably where we left off. Talk maybe a little bit more about the New King James Version and what came about there and its popularity. But starting off, we've got Eli McGowan parody. Yeah, we do not have Eli himself watching this show. Well, he might be, but he's certainly not watching it for the right reasons. But Eli McGowan parody says, looking forward to this one. Yeah, well, it's a good one so far. Thanks, Musonius, for coming on. This has been awesome so far. Benjamin Alpaca says, super interesting topic. Thanks for tackling this. Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. Benjamin Alpaca, that was awesome. Don't know what he's referring to. The show is still referring. Going.
These comments were coming in when my little intro. So you made the video, for the record. I did not make the video. I had sent a file of just, hey man, I made this for the show, and it was actually another one that I intended to have as an opening. But you had made the video, and I was like, oh, we could just play that. That'll be cool.
Yeah, and I'll try and get that other one made as an intro, because it's a bit shorter and more punchy. And the original idea was that the blues would be playing before we went live, but I am a technological neophyte. I still have to figure some things out. Nathaniel Clements says, evening, gents. Good evening, sir. Thaddeus Johnson, no note. Thank you, sir. Ash Bruce says, hello. Thaddeus says, now we have to go back to fasting on Fridays.
I think he's referring to me saying that the Easter season is over.
Yeah. Well, I'm
I never did
I'm a
that
Baptist,
anyway, so.
and I don't fast very much.
Yeah.
When I do, it's usually for like some very specific personal reasons. But yeah, some of us are, the scriptures have set us free, and some of us have been set more free than others. Nathaniel Clemens says, "Banger."
Thank you.
Maybe referring to the music. Yeah, I love it. I think it
Yeah,
was cool.
I liked your guitar work.
Thaddeus Johnson, I was not expecting the audio. It scared me, but it was good. Yeah, I think the audio is a little loud. I'm going to have to go in there and figure out how to do that, because it might have the effect of jump scaring folks. Thaddeus Johnson, Baptists on the Mayflower? Yeah, little thinky face there. If you could, Musonius, just go into a little bit more. What you referred to them as a Brownsis, or what was that? Could
Brownists. Yeah, I'm not an expert at Puritan history here, but yeah, the Brownists. You remember the Mayflower people? They had to leave England and they went to the Netherlands first. Then they went over to the New World, right?
Because they kind of got kicked out of England.
Yeah, they're nonconformist churches, right?
Yeah, and they're still nonconformist to this day.
Right. Well, they were
celebrating Christmas. Come on.
Yeah, and looking down on like Shakespeare or theater or any of that. But yeah, the Puritans were a spectrum of different belief. Some of them were very reformed, and Calvinists, what we would call Calvinists, and some of them were very restorationist, I would say, in their theology, where they just wanted to recreate the first century church, and maybe they had Armenian or something like that beliefs about salvation. So a Brownist, is it John Caney? Yeah, John Caney was a Brownist, and that man added more cross references to the Bible than any other person I know. Well, maybe John Brown of Haddington. But he was the first guy to come up with the idea of, well, we want the Bible to interpret itself, so I'm gonna go through the Bible and add a lot more cross references. So if you come to a hard spot, you could turn to somewhere else. And he was a Brownist. John Caney was,
and so kind of laid the foundation for the Thompson chain reference, which came later.
Exactly. The Thompson chain reference is really the culmination of centuries worth of cross-reference work done by John Caney, John Brown of Haddington, the famous Scot that made the self-interpreting Bible, the best-selling study Bible of the 1700s. George Washington was on the purchase list for the third edition, and when it came into port in New York.
So there's your American pedigree right there.
Right. The self-interpreting Bible was probably the best-selling study Bible of the 19th century, and it was done by a Scot, and he was a very pious man. Anyway, he added like 200,000. And if you want to know what this Bible looked like, his cross references, not his annotations, but his the Trinitarian Bible Society produces the Westminster Reference Bible, and you will find Benjamin Blaney's chapter summaries, his version of the King James chapter summaries, and it spills over into the margin because they're much bigger than the King James. They called it contents of chapters, but they're chapter summaries or head notes to each chapter. And then in the margin, you have the 200,000 cross references. Your average reference Bible is only going to have 60 to 70,000, and this has got 200,000 cross references in it. I mean, the only thing that's bigger is the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge it says 500,000, but it's really like 390,000 cross references in it. But that's if you've ever run across that book, which is a favorite fundamentalist book, for studying using the Scripture to interpret Scripture. Let's put it that way. But yeah, the Baptists were there. They just weren't called Baptists, but they were Restorationist Christians, Restorationist Puritans, as opposed to the purely Reformed Puritans. So that's all I know. Yeah, they were.
So did they hold to like a believer's baptism, or an Anabaptist kind of ideas, or were they still on the Baptist issue? Were they still very old old country, baby dunkers and sprinklers and things like
No,
that.
I think they had adult baptism, and they probably didn't have full blown baptismal regeneration, but no, they were there. The Baptists, they weren't called Baptists. There was a spectrum. This early period is so confusing because you get to Wales, and remember the Calvinistic Methodists. Talk about an oxymoron.
Wesleyans and yeah.
Yeah, but they're Calvinistic Methodists, and it's like,
Mhm.
oh, okay. But yeah, nonconformists, if you were outside the Church of England, there was a spectrum of belief. And, the ones that, didn't fit in Church of Scotland or England, it was best that they go to America, especially the Restorationist people. So
Interesting. Yeah. So when I was learning my early American history, our text always talked about, the Baptists began in Rhode Island, but what was his name? The nonconformist who founded Rhode Island.
Sherman? Is it Roger Sherman?
No.
No.
Roger. His name was Rogers, something Rogers. But he was the one that everybody points to. And he's like, oh yeah, he's the first Baptist. But you're saying it kind of began before that.
Yes. It
Roger
did not
Williams.
begin in a vacuum.
Roger Williams. There we go. Yeah,
that's it.
See, every time I think of Roger Williams, I get isn't that singer who sang all those funny songs? Isn't he also Roger Williams? He did the Robin Hood theme and the Disney show, but that's kind of off topic. But I always think of the wrong Roger Williams whenever I'm trying to think of him. Thaddeus Johnson in the comments says, every time the horse jerked, we got a new chapter break. Yeah, referring to the guy putting in the verse numbers. I think the chapters actually came before the verse numbers, right? The chapters were there for a little bit before the verse numbers came along. Is that right?
Yeah, the chapter numbers exist in Latin, and there were there was a certain family that had a Bible with all the Bibles originally were divided into pericopes, for the lectionary, and pericopes are readings that you would do on certain days, so there was that. But yeah, the chapters pre-exist. They're basically pericopes, and I forget there was a particular family Bible that all English chapters are descended from, but it was in Latin. Yeah, so they existed in Latin, but the verse numbers did not. The verse numbers were added by the Geneva Marian exiles that did the Geneva Bible.
Interesting. Yeah, but every time the horse jerked, we may have gotten a different verse number. He must have been on a smoother road when he was putting the numbers through Exodus, because or not Exodus, but Esther, because those are some long verses in there.
Yeah, like there's a lot of mythology, because these are all dissidents, right? Like Tyndale, where he lived was kind of a secret. It's sort of hard to trace him because he was in different places, when the Catholics would come and burn down the publishing house that he was going to print at and stuff. Well, the same thing goes for the Geneva, they'll say Whittingham was his wife was a sister to John Calvin's wife, right? And that's gone into, that's like chopping down the cherry tree. It's like mythology that has become history. But when you research it, really, you're like, no, they weren't. They weren't sisters.
Really?
Yeah, they weren't.
So it's not even true at all.
No, but it has become regular history books will say it, because it's a little known fact, but that's how it is with dissidents. They often have different names. They're underground. Like Tyndale, he was in the English house, where it was basically like an embassy where the Holy Roman Empire couldn't go in. So he had to be tricked to come outside in order to arrest him. Right. But no one inside the house would say anything about him because they were all hiding out, from authority,
Yeah. And, if you're hiding from the government, the people who are most likely to help hide you are other people hiding from the government. Yeah. So what you're saying is that the Bible was translated into English by by
Outlaws.
anons who were incel anons hiding in their mother's basement. Is that what you're telling me right now,
Oh
Musonius?
yeah, you got it. Yeah, there's a lot of incels, like Cruden, who did Cruden's Concordance. The dude was a total incel, autistic incel. He went to the loony bin like twice. But whenever you sat him
Interesting.
down, he'd start going back through the Bible. He was like a machine. Because Cruden's Concordance is like the Apollo space program of Bible references. It's like, wow, every single sentence, huh? Yes, and I did the Apocrypha separately.
Wow.
Yeah, one man
So,
did that. Yeah, so
for those of you who think that autism was caused by vaccines, it has been around for a while.
yeah, Dake, the Pentecostal Bible guy, he was basically an autist. You sit him down and he's like, well, he starts making Bible lists. You'll never find a Bible with more lists than the Dake annotated Bible. There's been a lot of autistes. Thompson, his cross references people actually use because he turned them into chain form, right? And that is probably the most popular study Bible of the last 100 years is the Thompson chain reference.
Yeah, that was my dad's most treasured Bible was a Thompson chain reference Bible. So we would anytime he was reading the Bible in church or in family worship, that's what he was using, and it was amazingly helpful to have that going back and forth. Where it's like, hey, look, it's all tied together. So.
Right. And so people, it's like a choose your own adventure game. People will actually do it. It's really hard to get people to actually, they're called Bible moths, because there are people that do it. They just, constantly turning the Bible to go through all the cross references and compare. And you got to be a real Bible moth, to really use a lot of these reference Bibles where they have, we got 60,000 cross references. Thompson actually gets people to use them by making chains out of them. And they go back to topics in the back. Right. So, so he actually uses gets you to use the cross references, which is useful. You're using the Bible to interpret the Bible, and it cuts down on the amount of, comments, annotations, notes that you put in the Bible, because you're using the Bible to interpret itself. So, the Thompson chain reference is a fine study Bible. I highly recommend it. So,
all right. Thaddeus again says people weren't very happy with Jerome when he came out with his Vulgate. So when Jerome came out with his Vulgate, like you were saying, Musonius, there already were pre-existent Latin Bibles.
Yes.
But the church kind of wanted one that they could point to and be like, okay, this is the authorized. We're using that phrase quite a bit here. We're noticing a pattern through the ages, but the church wanted something that they could point to and be like, here's our authorized version of the Latin. Could you talk to, I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but kind of what was the reaction to Jerome? What were some of the, what were some of the reasons that he was selected and what his plan was with the Vulgate when he was translating?
Yeah, I think a Catholic nerd would do a better job here. But basically, they did. St. Jerome is this. They did the same thing that the Protestants did. The Protestants are like, we want to skip the Latin, go back to the original Greek and Hebrew, and so so we establish our foundation without Latin, right? Well, that's what Jerome is doing with the Septuagint. He is skipping the Greek Old Testament to go back to the Hebrew. Right. And that's controversial because you're basically saying we're an independent. We're completely independent from the great churches of the East, all the patriarchs of the East. And, we're not dependent upon Greek at all. Right. Except for the New Testament. But when it comes to the Old Testament, we are not dependent upon the Greek. And so he was basically doing to the Eastern Orthodox, half of because back then it was all Catholicism, right? So the difference was Greek speaking versus Latin speaking in the West. And so he's doing to all the Greek speaking churches what, the English Protestants did to the Roman Catholic Church.
To the Catholics later.
Yeah, he's going around the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Bible for Ortho Bros, Eastern Orthodox Christians. It is the Old Testament. And, it's they'll admit, original Hebrew it was originally written in Hebrew, and this is a translation, but you can't trust, those medieval Jews to give you the real Masoretic text, right? So, because it's 1,000. Our copies of the Septuagint are much older than the Leningrad Codex, which is about the oldest complete Masoretic text. So that's a whole other subject where people argue. But
so when in reference to his comment, people were not very happy when he came out with his Vulgate. From what I understand, the church, the Western Church, Rome, was pretty happy with the version he came out with, but there were some disputations between, I haven't read these, but I know by report, between him and Augustine and other church fathers who are like, hey, what is your source on this? And he was, let's say, reticent to disclose some of those sources. And some people were a little bit suspicious of him. What was the overall, was there a scandal involved in his translation?
Yeah, well, the scandal all came from Greek speakers in the East. They're like, well, you're not translating this correctly. But I do. When I looked at the Vulgate, it seemed like St. Jerome was a lot more liberal when he started the project than when he ended. So there's going to be allegations that he's too liberal a translator at the beginning, and then by now he's considered like reactionary standard Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
But when he started the project, he was the crazy liberal, or considered the crazy liberal. And like I said, he had access to Hebrew texts that we don't have anymore. I mean, I would love to see what Hebrew texts he had, but the centuries, the Dark Ages, it wiped them out. So our oldest Masoretic texts come from the Middle Ages, not from the ancient world. But Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, there's these famous Bibles that go back to the ancient world, to before the Middle Ages, and they're the Septuagint. So
very interesting. The other Paul, howdy, Paul, how are you doing? He says, how do you do hard G, hard R's? That's a reference to a previous show where we were talking about the Greek pronunciation for the country of Niger, and Greek students having to pronounce it with a hard G and a hard R.
yeah.
Apparently, that's his favorite episode.
I think that's going to be a lot of people's favorite episodes. That one got clipped and sent around in the group chats. Lots of people had fun with that one.
Yeah, G's and C's are soft in front of front vowels, E and I, and that is because of Latin. That happened in vulgar Latin in the Middle Ages. So, you can see that in my name, Jeffrey or Geoffroy, depending on which language it is that you're speaking as you read that. That is a soft G, not a hard G. Right. Right, and Greek,
Latin
that didn't happen in Greece, in Greek. So the G's are always hard in front of front vowels, and
because it developed out of the letter C. I did some study on this. I can't remember the guy's name now, but his name had a C in it, the way it was spelt, and there was no G up until this point. But his name was pronounced, we'll just say his name was Clyde, which it was not. But his name was Glide, not Clyde. And everybody would read his name and they'd call him Clyde. And he was like, no, this is Glide. Stop saying cut. It's
a lot of like Gaius Julius Caesar. The Gaius was originally spelled C. G was G comes from, there were 3 different Greek alphabets and the Romans got the Western one. So, where G comes from. The Greeks famously have gamma, was the 4th letter of the Greek alphabet, and it never softens in front of front vowels. During the vulgar Latin softened during the Middle Ages to where C's became S. They actually became TS sounds. So a C became a TS sound. And then in modern Romance languages, that TS sound turned into either a cha or a za or a sa, right? But in French, it's an S, right? So in English, it's an S. So the TS turned into an S.
And that's anytime you get into translation, you always get into the subject of development of language, vowel shifts, and consonantal drift, because these things do change over time just naturally, by human use. human use is ultimately, by nature corruptive. You can see that especially since the rise of the internet, meme culture, different words come into being. Right now, there's a joke going around with goon squads, because goon used to mean something different than it does now in internet culture. And gooning used to mean, participating in a goon squad, arresting people. And now it has a very different vulgar meaning.
Oh, yeah.
That completely invented.
Yeah.
But, 20 years from now, when somebody reads, that people were going around gooning, they're going to have a very different understanding of what that means. And that's just natural linguistic drift, and goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel. Like you were saying earlier, Indo-European languages, English and Farsi, Persian, share one thing in common that is distinct from all other Indo-European languages, which is the neuter articles for all non-gendered, human beings, more or less, are the only things. Yeah. But even in English, with I don't refer to my dog as he most of the time. I'll refer to him as he, but if I'm referring to someone else's dog, most of the time I'm going to call it, because I don't know if it's a he or a she. It's just a dog running through my yard. Hey man, your dog's running through my yard, and it dug up my wife's flower bed. That's
just go up and sniff, man. That's how I do it.
Yeah. You've got to figure out. Did you ask his preferred pronouns?
Yeah.
All right. Thaddeus Johnson, Roger Williams. Yes, that is correct. Roger Williams of Rhode Island fame, not Roger Williams of Can't Roller Skate in a Buffalo Herd fame.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting his name right.
And not Roger Waters of Pink Floyd fame.
No, yeah, that's Pink Floyd.
So the reason my internet and everything is going out, we have a major storm coming through currently.
Yeah, I heard some thunder earlier. I wasn't sure
it's pretty wild, man. Stuff in the backyard falling over.
It's supposed to be. We're under a flood watch where we are here in Central Texas as well, but
it's fun.
not a drop of rain right now, so I don't know when this flood's supposed to start.
Hey, Jeff, if you didn't have like other topics specifically that you wanted to go over, I did actually have like a bunch of things I wrote down about like translation that I thought would be interesting
fire
to bring
away.
up. So we had kind of talked about this. We had talked about how certain updates happen. I'm curious if you have the answer to this, of when this happens. So in Greek, there is no version of apostrophe S for ownership. It's just the genitive form. So instead of saying, I don't have a specific example in mind, but like say instead of Ham's curse, it would be the curse of Ham. Like that's the way it would literally be in Greek. Or, the garment of Jesus, we would just say Jesus's garment, and we would use like an apostrophe S thing. Is there a moment in English translations where they went from that? Because I know that there are English translations that will just keep that very awkward way of showing ownership in just the genitive form.
Well, that we talked about this a little bit before we started publishing or recording. Like you have to use participles, all right, to represent these cases if they're extant in the original Bible manuscripts. You have to use to, for dative and such. So I don't know. You'd have to go when it comes to a Bible translation. You'd have to look to see how they do the genitive. Like I bet Young's literal translation, I bet it never uses an apostrophe S, right?
Yeah,
I bet it never does. So, but I bet. Remember, English used to be more Germanic than it is now, and Germans have a strict adjective before object order. To it. It's more. We get of, I think, from the. Give me a second. This putting adjectives after nouns is very French. you know. So the more Germanic the English is, the more likely it is to use an apostrophe s, because that way you have the adjective in front of what it modifies, right? So the older versions probably have more apostrophe s's. The literal versions probably don't have any, and the modern versions probably have a lot more ofs in them. But they did not use of a lot in early modern English, unless, you know, in place of the genitive. They would usually use the genitive, in my experience. So I could be wrong.
Another thing that we kind of mentioned, idiomatic language, and that made me think of something that there's a fantasy writer. His name is Brandon Sanderson. He's like the most, if not famous, the most rich author of the moment in that genre. He talks about debate that they have within that genre of describing things from other planets or from other like worlds, other dimensions, whatever. Because if I was to tell you, like, I put my feet up on an ottoman, you know what that is. Everyone here knows what that is. Whereas, you know, someone on another world, they'd be like, did the Ottoman Empire exist in this other world? And that's where they got the name for this piece of furniture. And like, so there's that kind of debate of like, you know, how much of our own idiomatic language can we use? And I think that that's a good example to kind of show why some of these translation things have to happen. A lot of people seem to think it's just a matter of, well, you know, these really stupid people couldn't read the KJV, so they came up with the NIV so that they can read it. It's at a lower reading level, and that's why they made it. But that's not always true. I mean, there are actual reasons for translating out some of these idioms come in. Or,
yeah, the KJV would just say footstool, right, instead of ottoman, right? So you use a very Anglo-Saxon, slap two words together, German style, you know.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the words change. The English language has changed. You got to keep it. You got to fight for it and keep it. It's like, you know, working out or something. So like I grew up in a King James church, and then like, you know, when I was a teenager, we went to a bigger church, you know, because there were more people there. You know, we went from the small country church to the bigger town church, and that they were NIV people. And so I realized that I had a secret power, because I understood King James Early Modern English, and a lot of these people didn't, you know, because they didn't grow up on it, right? And when I started learning German at the university, I'm like, well, this is just King James. You know, you put the verb in the second place, and you throw a T on the end, and instead of a TH, you know, on the third person verb, and German comes off very King Jamesy. So you could tell that German has changed a lot less than English has. You know, English has wildly changed when it comes to long vowels. You know, the Great Vowel Shift. There were 3 different versions of it. There's a version of it right now where Michiganders, you know, they think they sound like the television set, but they're actually their vowels have changed, you know. It's called the Great Northern Cities Vowel Shift. So, yeah, language is changing, but some languages change more than others. German is a very conservative language, right? So, you know, kids learn early on during primary language acquisition that you can slap words together, and you know, as a good German speaker, and so they actually learn German faster than English speakers learn English as their primary language. You know, English is over half our dictionary is like Latin and Greek. There's a small smattering of Greek, mostly technical scientific terms, but half our dictionary is Latin, right? When we speak to children or animals or every day, we're very Germanic. You know, we say house, not residence. But as soon as we start getting fancy and abstract, we immediately turn into Latin speakers, right? Usually through the French. So our language
so like the way I talk about my own house is going to be very different than the way that I would talk to a renter about their residence.
Right.
Because when I talk to a renter, or I sign or write out a rental agreement, you know, it's not their house, it's my house.
Right.
But it's not my residence, it's their residence. And that multiple influence actually makes English while it is a complex language, one of the hardest languages to learn, um, even at a fundamental level, it's a very excellent language for communicating complex ideas, kind of like Greek in, at the turn of the millennium. Uh, you know, you would have the language of law was Greek, the language of religion was Greek because it had a lot more specificity. Like you would have 5 words for love. It's like that's seemingly unnecessary. In the Germanic languages, we just have love, right? It's like Liebe or love or Liefde. That's the word. You don't need to. If you need to specify, then maybe we'll throw some more nouns and just cram them all together to make the compound word, familial love or fatherly love. But English is simultaneously the hardest language to learn, but also one of the most usable because of the technicalities. It cuts both ways, so to speak.
So that's a good transition to something that is one of my constant axes to grind when it comes to Bible translations. And please let me know if this has already been addressed somewhere. But when we talk about synonyms, like you had said, because English has so many different origins, we have a ton of synonyms, probably more than the vast majority of languages in the world.
Yep.
Because you can have a word that means the exact same thing from the Latin source that means something from the Old English source, or some French version of the Latin source, all this kind of stuff. But one of the places that really bothers me in the New Testament is, and I say the New Testament because I don't have Hebrew experience, but I have Greek experience. So in Romans, for instance, the Greek word dikaios can mean either justice or righteousness. And throughout Romans, Paul is making the same point with the same Greek word. But in English, in all the English translations, it goes back and forth from justice to righteousness. And so some people might understand, well, okay, that's the same word. Like I know that it's the same word in Greek. And so the point that he is making over the span of like 4 chapters where he uses that same Greek word like a million times, like I understand that's all making the same point. But in English, some people might see justice as very different from righteousness. It just hits the ears different. Or, there's a lot of baggage with the word justice these days with all the crazy things people have imported into it. So I guess one thing I would like to see is a translation where every time a word, like that there are no back and forth with the synonyms. So you would have every time dikaios is there, it's whatever form of either justice or righteousness. Just pick one and don't go with the other one.
Just stick with it.
Stick with that one and keep with that one.
Yeah, I know that they did a lot of work in Paul's epistles. So maybe you ought to check out, see what the American Standard translators did with the Paul's epistles. But yeah, you're right. Translators
the NASB,
call that,
would the NASB count as that?
Yeah. What does the NASB do?
Well, it goes back and forth.
Oh, it does too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the one I was thinking of because I was, that's what I would compare my own. What was that?
What do you know what the New King James does? Because it's the same niche as the NASB. They're trying to make a very literal but readable.
Off the top of my head, they all will go back and forth to some. Let's see. One of our buddies in the chat right now just brought up that the concordant version of the Bible does have very standardized usage for words. So he would be someone who would know. I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's more literal than the Young's. The concordant version is probably the most literal, this side of an interlinear, and it's more literal than some interlinears, if you ask me. It was done in the teens and 20s, and it's even more literal than the Young's. But yeah, I've run across it. I don't think there's a Hebrew. I think it's just the New Testament. Maybe I'm wrong, but the reason why it's called concordant was they compared. They wanted the words to always use the same word, like what you're talking about.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's going to be much closer. And
See,
Young's, I would first look at Young's and see what he does.
That's that autism thing we were talking about. Like, there's never a new form of autism. There's always like some guy, hundreds of years ago who had the same exact. Yeah, he had the same exact idea. I'm tired of justice and righteousness being in the same epistle.
Right.
I need one word.
Right. He did it first. Like, you're right. Translators call that elegant variation because they don't want to bore you. But Paul, he is repetitive. All the people that read Paul in Greek, know what he's doing. It's a rhetorical device where you say the same thing over and over again, And but the translators usually use elegant variation to change it up with Paul to make it more interesting.
Another word that we do this too often with is the word fellow that I named this book back here after on purpose. And it's the word for will, but we translate it as like wish, will, want, desire. But if you saw those 4 words in the same epistle, you wouldn't make that connection. You wouldn't say like, oh, this is making the same point over and over again, because those words hit the ear very differently. Like, I don't know if footnotes could solve that or what, but I mean, you'd have to have a ton of footnotes if you didn't just standardize the language.
Yeah, the Keyword Study Bible by AMG Publishers will put the Strong's numbers on these words. It's a regular Bible, but it has the Strong's numbers as superscripted to these words. So that might be one way to keep track. Because you'll see it's the same number every time.
Well, I mean, my personal favorite way to read the New Testament, like if I'm trying to go like deep into it, is just to have a interlinear, and I'm just reading. I'm going up and down between it, so I have the speed of having the English already there, but then I can be looking at the Greek while I'm doing that, and then I mean that's my personal way if I'm really going to go at it. But not everyone knows Greek, so that's why I'm like, man, if we just had like a standardized word.
That's why I was thinking about the Strong's numbers. Always using it's a way around it. It sounds like you just want a very literal version, and you're going to have to look at the concordant. There's Young's. Smith, the only woman to ever translate the Bible, was from Massachusetts, but by herself.
Julia of course.
Right.
Of course, she was from Massachusetts. Boo.
Yeah, she was. And her Bible went nowhere. Like, no one bought it. But
I'm not buying it.
Yeah. Who were the people that expected the end of the world?
Get back in the kitchen.
Was it Millerites that expected the world to end in like 1833?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, Seventh-day Adventists came out of that, and you had a lot of, Jack Chick even very heavily influenced, though he might not know it, by the Millerite movements of the 1800s. The Mormons actually came out of the Millerite movement.
Yeah, well, she because of the Great Disappointment, she made very literal translations of the Bible, because she thinks that the tenses of these original words have some sort of secret meaning, for prophecy. So anyway, she's the Julia Smith translation's a literal translation. There's some society sitting on her Septuagint. She translated the Septuagint twice, but
the first one wasn't good enough, huh?
No. Well, but she was an autiste too. I mean, she just did it. She had these little blue books, and she would just fill them up all day. This was what she did, translating the Bible, looking for the secrets of prophecy in it. But the Julia Smith translation is a forgotten version. It came out at the same time as Young's first, which was 1862. I think that it came out. Young's literal translation was finished by his students. In 1898 is the third edition. So I check out Young's, the concordant version. That is a little known literal version.
And you can get Young's for free on most software.
Yeah.
I have it on Olive Tree, and I think I have it on Logos as well. You can get it for free because
Another
whoever
fun
it is
one.
that holds the copyright, if it's not expired,
Yeah,
they just
it's
let
a
you
public
have it.
domain. It's a public
Hmm.
domain. eBible.org has Young's on it too, along with the
Hmm.
American Standards that I was talking, and the RV. He put the RV on there with Apocrypha and everything. All the public domain Bibles are there. I tell you a real interesting one, if you really want to go in the weeds, is Thompson. Because he did the New Testament too, and you realize, like, man, he was like Robert Young, 100 years before Robert Young. He was
Hmm.
really literal. Like it's reign instead of kingdom of God. It's like reign
Reign of
instead of
Christ.
reign
Yeah.
of heaven, and
Hmm.
he's
Oh,
using Hades.
when I
Yeah,
think of the Lord's Prayer in Greek is actually our Father who is in the heavens.
yeah,
Like it's literally that, and I don't understand why I think that's an idiomatic thing. Is that when they talked about in the heavens, they understood that differently than the way that maybe modern ears would hear that, but that is the way that it is in Greek. It's plural. It's not just in heaven; it's in the heavens.
yeah. And the famously, you're going to have to help me out here, but it's reversed, right? So uh, uh, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I think heaven and earth are reversed, the phrases in the original New Testament. So,
Oh,
uh,
I'd have to pull
as
up.
in heaven, so on earth. You know,
Hmm.
and the American Standard
Are you
version.
saying as above, so below?
No, that's Hermetic saying, but heaven and earth are switched in the Gospels, and it's
Hmm.
because of the prayer lectionary that they have it the way that it is. But is as in heaven, so on earth is so instead of on earth as it is in heaven, right?
Hmm.
So our Bible, English Bible, says on earth as it is in heaven, but it's actually reversed in the original. And I think the American Standard, it's reversed. If you go to that, go to that
Is it
section.
really
Yeah,
interesting?
yeah, because they're slaves to Greek word order.
Hmm.
But I'm telling you, Thompson, if you really like literal translations of the Bible, he did the New Testament and he did the Old Testament. No Apocrypha, though, because his edition of the Fields Septuagint did not have it. So there's no Apocrypha for Thompson. But, he it's a very literal translation, and he's a good stylist because he was a recorder for Congress. Like, men used to get in cane fights over the truth of the record. He
Hmm.
got in a cane fight, you know, with a guy from South Carolina. So
Yeah, cane fights in Congress and in the Senate. Um, Personally, I think we should bring that back. Like,
yeah,
I'd
yeah,
love to see
Oh,
dueling.
senators
Yeah,
just absolutely beat to heck with a cane.
all right,
I'd
guys.
do it myself.
I gotta. I'm gonna go ahead and verify what you just said. I don't know how good
All
this
right,
shows up on
let's
camera.
hear. Well, just read it off to us because that type is
Dog.
pretty
No,
small.
well, I'm just gonna say that you're correct that it is. Well, I guess I can just say Hos and Urano Kai Epi Gaze, which is, on heaven, basically like as it is in heaven and upon earth. I guess is a kind of a literal way of saying it. But this was also a good example. If I can get it, I'm going to put my finger where you see Basileia there. Oh, that's not gonna work. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Uh,
it's a good example of the genitive thing that I was talking about. Because you have in verse 10. Let me see. That's a theta. I think the way the thetas are in this is really weird. El feto he basileia su. So it's like the kingdom of you, but it really is your kingdom, is what it's
mhm,
trying to say. But it's
mhm.
just one of those things where I'm. So that is interesting. That you're right. It is the opposite way of what you had said.
Yeah, yeah. Well, these little differences you can see in a more literal translation, and that's why, even though I'm a King James supremacist, if you're studying the Bible, you really need another Bible. Nothing can help you out. Especially, we get caught up in our dogmatic slumbers, and that's why, even though Young's is very awkward, sometimes it's like, you've heard the same phrases in the Bible your whole life since you were a kid, and hearing it a different way makes you think about it in a different way. Young famously thinks there's a lot to, was it Ionos, of the age,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
that's a really weird one too, because when in the Great Commission, the it doesn't say like I am with you. Well, it says like even unto the end of the age, but like there's other places where into the end of the age just means forever. It's like in an idiomatic way we translate it as just forever, and so it's weird to me that we don't do one or the other on that.
Right.
Because some
That's a
people will
good
say,
example.
oh, that means eternity. But then some people will say, no, it just means the end of whatever the age is. So after whatever thousands of years or until the age of Aquarius or whatever theories people have on that. I'm not making that one up. That's
Oh,
not just a
I
reference
know.
to obscure. Like,
I know, it's still funny though. But no. Young famously says he says age during, age hyphen during.
age enduring, or yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and age abiding, which is a little bit better English, is like your Rotherham emphasized Bible. There's several Bibles that make this distinction because age, unto the age or for the age, doesn't necessarily mean forever or eternity. And so they think it's an important part to get the prophecy right of, the return of Christ, the reign of 1,000 years, to get all that correct. They want to translate it more literal.
Well, I guess
And
my question with people that say that it shouldn't just be forever, which I understand, like literally it's unto the end of the age, but do you think Christ isn't going to be with us after the end of this age, or like what does that mean? Like what would people even think it means? And like I said, like other places in the New Testament, we just translate it as eternity or forever or something
yeah,
like that.
Yeah, well, a lot of this comes from soul sleepers, or I mean, it's not. You think, oh, is this Arianism? A separation between Christ and God. It's like no, a lot of it's soul sleepers. Like they're like, look, man cannot live without a body. So when this world is destroyed, it's sort of like what Jehovah's Witnesses do in the doorway, right? They're like, man, when this world is destroyed, God's going to recreate a new earth, and resurrect us all on it. And it's like, oh, okay, they're making those sort of distinctions. It's not really like an Arian, and it's not even like a dispensationalist thing. Not really, because dispensationalists, it's all about. They all think it's going to happen right now. I'm a post millennial, millenarian personally, but most Southerners are pre millennialists, and but I think it's soul sleepers. I think that's what the argument is, because a lot of people believe like man can't live without a body, so the resurrection of the body is very important for them, just very important. Oh, you don't have eternal souls, heaven is going to be timeless. They make these sort of arguments. Those are the people I've run into personally. So I don't know. Usually there's a couple of semi-Arian readings in the ASV because they had a Unitarian on the committee, and they're not Arian readings. They are not, but they could be, right? They've weakened it a little bit. So like, instead of saying like God and, our God and Savior, Jesus Christ, it's like our God and the Savior, the ESV does. Well, that's not pure Arianism, separating the two, but it does open the way to Arianism for if Unitarians wanted to use that Bible. And there's a couple of those readings. So you have to be on the lookout for these, if you're a Trinitarian, you got to be on the lookout for Arians and stuff. So that's really what these arguments are about. Is these churches have different theologies. Some of them are really against eternal souls. They're like, no, we're going to be resurrected. It's like, okay, gotcha, man. But I think that's what a lot of these arguments are about, like age. It's like, wait a minute, God is timeless. What you don't think it's going to be forever next time, or after the apocalypse? What are you thinking? And it's like, well, they're all about their new earth and new bodies. And
even not in that construction of into the end of the age, when you have when Jesus is talking about some going into eternal life and some going into eternal damnation or hellfire. It's literally age enduring. It doesn't even say. There's not like a technical word for eternal that I like. That's how they say eternal is what I'm trying to say. But if you nitpick it, if you try to get like super like weird about it, and you don't take into account that that's how Greeks say, that's how they express eternity, then you're going to be like, oh, well, hell only exists for an age. So eventually, when they're all burnt up to a crisp and they just kind of fade away.
Cookies are done.
I think
cookies are done. Throw them away.
Yeah, say that. It's all about their hell. They don't want hell to be forever. You got it.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. And I'm sympathetic to people who want to believe that. Because I understand the desire. It's like, well, my grandma who's not a Christian, I don't want to believe that she's in hell forever. But it's like, it's just not supported by the text.
Yeah, well, if you get the weirdos like Jehovah's Witnesses or Christadelphians or even some of the Ortho Bros,
Seventh-day Adventists,
yeah, they believe, and I think that this is they believe that on Judgment Day everyone's resurrected, and then the unrighteous burn. The ones that Jesus does not know will burn. And I've never heard them commit to whether they burn to a crisp and it's over, or whether the burn goes on for eternity. So I think you're dealing with real heretics if they emphasize the temporary nature of hell. Right.
Well, the problem that we would always point out, if you look at that verse, is, like I said, it says that where the righteous go is age enduring, and where the unrighteous go is age enduring. So if you're trying to argue in this one, it's not even like it's separate text. It's one parallel thing within one sentence. If you're going to argue that hell ends, well, you're kind of arguing that heaven's going to have to end too, because that is the same phraseology. If you're going to be weird about the, if you're going to be
I'm not here to defend them, but they're saying, well, that's just Judgment Day. Then the age comes to an end, and then you got the new earth where only the righteous will have eternal deathless bodies, and then the unrighteous all burned up, says the hell deniers, right? That they're literally annihilated. And it's like, well, this is basically the arguments that I've had with Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm just giving you their argument because that's what they believe. So, but I think this is good because it shows that these translations have theological implications. Even small changes in the Bible have big theological implications.
Well, and you had mentioned when we first started about the words that show up in italics, and essentially what ends up happening, people will think like, oh, you're just inserting something. Like Luther has a work, I think it's called like On Translation or something. It's great. It's very, very short, but he's responding to people being angry at him translating into German. And one of the things that people don't like about his translation is when he says faith alone in Romans 1, right? It's like 117, 119, something like that off the top of my head. Where the righteous are justified by faith. He says that alone is implied because it doesn't list anything else that the righteous are justified by. So he's like, well, I didn't add anything. The word is already implied in Greek, and so I just put it there in German.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what's happening a lot of the time with these italics words. People will think that, oh, they're just inserting it for some purpose or something. But like I said, a lot of this is just implied. And if you don't, it is there in the Greek, but there's no way to like one for one it into the English. And so we have to add this word to make it that way. Or like if you were to translate, like we were talking about these ridiculously long German words. Like when I was stationed in Germany, I'd see this like 30 letter word, and I'm like, dude, I'm not even going to try to read that. But if you were to translate it, it would take more than one word.
Yeah.
And so that's what a lot of people, if you never actually studied Greek, you're not understanding that there's words there that are kind of like in between the lines, and you're not really adding them, you're just bringing them out. And that was just something I wanted to say, because a lot of people will look at, like, try to read the text and not read those words that are in italics, and you'll be like, oh yeah, that wouldn't have made sense if they didn't put that word in.
Yeah, and that's how all translation works. You got to add words, because these are different languages, and the words have different semantic fields. So let's take two English words like obtain and attain. They basically mean to get or to get possession of, but obtain just means to get possession of, whereas attain means to get possession of through effort. Okay, so they have the same semantic field, but attain is a little bit bigger. It has one extra property in it, right? But otherwise, you could use these words almost interchangeably, and no one would notice. But if you're splitting hairs, and we're talking about the word of God here, so people are going to be splitting hairs, you got to be exact. So not all the words in Greek have the same semantic fields as their corresponding words in English. So you got to use words. You got to add more words or subtract. You got to do that. That's translation. That's what translation is. So you got to get the thought right, and you're right. There's a little bit too much obsession with literal word for word. If you guys aren't going to study Greek, like the whole purpose of that is to help you guys study Greek, right? But if you guys just want to poo-poo other Bible translations, it's like, well, thought for thought is easier to read. You're more likely to read it. That's the great thing about dynamic translation, right? It's supposed to be easier to read. So, and no Bible matters if you don't read it, right? So what's the purpose of all this if you're not reading the Bible, right? So we have to remember the basics here. Yeah, all translation involves adding words and choosing the right words.
Yeah.
And a literal translation is trying to help you get back to the original languages. So you got to do some study, buddy. And people don't want to do that. They're like, oh, I'm not going to learn Koine. It's like, it's a rich language, man. I mean, look at the corpus of ancient Greek, and not everyone can do it. This is there's only a percentage of Christians that can even do this stuff. It's not necessary for salvation, but if you can do it, you might want to do it. So
yeah, I probably need to study some Greek.
Yeah, you got to study the Greek, and I'm very generous. Like I tried to present whatever they are, the age people that I tried to present them in a charitable way. I'm charitable to the Catholics. I'm like, I want you guys to preserve your Latin Vulgate. Please do that, right? It's a gift to the world. I'm a King James supremacist, but I'm just like, if you're doing serious Bible study, there's nothing like reading another translation to knock you out of your dogmatic slumbers and to see things for the first time, that have been right under your nose. And
fresh pair of eyes never hurt.
Yeah, it'll not. That's and when it comes to these obscure Bibles that I don't know why I decided hey, you guys should try the Thompson because it's literal and he's the first translator of. And you guys were talking about America. What is the Bible for the Bible tradition of America? And it's funny to me that we had one of the first biblical first that we ever did was we translated the Septuagint before the British did. We did that, and it was a founding father that did that,
Mhm.
and no one remembers it. He the Aiken Bible that Congress commissioned during the American Revolution. It was his daughter was the publisher of the Thompson Bible. It's a 4-volume reader's Bible, and you can get it on archive.org or Google Books. You can find copies of it, but it's interesting, and it's weird. It's like Young's. It's very literal,
Mhm.
So
That's such a different world to think about Congress commissioning a Bible.
yeah,
Like that's what they were concerned about was
yeah. Well, the Revolutionary Army, they wanted to make sure they had Bibles, right? So they had to
Oh, yeah.
purchase these Bibles. So yeah, I mean, they started Congress with prayers. George Washington, people are like, oh yeah, he was some sort of secularist and Freemason. It's like, no, he was a lot more religious than you are, bud. A lot more. So yeah, America was founded by a bunch of Christians fleeing persecution. The United States was. And so we were an extremely Christian nation. And there were certain assumptions that were made in the 19th century. Like when they try to avoid religion in the 19th century, everyone's still Christian. They're just trying to avoid sectarian strife. Right. So,
Mhm.
If you go to your lodge or some club meeting or whatever, it's like we avoid religion. Well, that's because we don't want Methodists and Presbyterians getting into fist fights, at our meetings. The assumption was we are a Christian nation. Remember, there were 2 theocracies that were part of the original 13 states that founded the United States, and they maintained their theocracies. Massachusetts was a theocracy. It had a state-sponsored church. So did Connecticut. And it wasn't until 31 that Massachusetts got rid of it. Notice that the First Amendment does not limit the states from being
Yeah.
as Christian, theocratic, and dominionist as they want to be, right?
Well, at least it didn't at its inception.
Well, and I would say
Yeah.
it doesn't now, because it's not like you passed an amendment to repeal the first, right?
Well,
So
supposedly the supremacy clause, it can be applied in a certain way.
it's incorporation doctrine where the Supreme Court
Mhm.
says us, 9 unelected lawyers, we can limit the states using the Federal Bill of Rights, which doesn't make any sense because all the states have Bill of Rights of their own. Many of them are better, frankly,
Mhm.
than the U.S. Bill of Rights. They're more detailed, and they were written by the founders too. Like,
Mhm.
my state has a right to revolution. That was from the Maryland Declaration of Rights. That is not represented by the U.S. Constitution. Pennsylvania and Texas both have taken that right of revolution from the Maryland Declaration of Rights. So
Mhm.
I just think it's ridiculous that we act like the founders weren't a bunch of states' rights men. Of course they were. What are you, crazy? I mean, even the
Mhm.
men who fought at Gettysburg for the Union still love their state, and they were buried according to their state in the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Right? This whole idea that we're one unitary nation and we have to be secular and all, what a bunch of nonsense. That is the most un-American crap ever. If you ask me, I'm a very opinionated on this subject
It's all
because
very post-war consensus to me.
Yeah. Well,
right, and they've lied to you about history, dude. They've lied to you about our own history, and they've passed it off and as the truth. It's like, you might be surprised at these historical figures that secularists and agnostics claim for themselves. How much time they spent, talking about the Bible. Because we were a thoroughly Christian society. Like, I don't like Abraham Lincoln. I'm a Southerner. I don't like that dude. He's a tyrant, but he spent most of his speeches talking about the Bible, right?
Mhm.
Because he was trying to persuade a Christian nation on what should be done, etc. Right? So the United States was a thoroughly Christian nation. And what in heaven's name are you talking about when you claim that they weren't? Even among the framers, like Thompson, who's going to spend 20 years of his life translating the Greek Septuagint for the first time into English if you're not a Christian? Of course he's a Christian.
Mhm.
He's a
Yeah.
Presbyterian. He might be a little bit liberal compared to theonomists today, but because he was a hardcore Republican, hated monarchy, but all these men are thoroughly Christian. I mean, the exceptions are people like even Jefferson. Jefferson is a darn deist, but he thinks Jesus is a great philosopher or some nonsense. So yeah, Jefferson he's not a believer. Okay. But even he read the Gospels. He just tried to ignore all the miracles.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like Epictetus, his Enchiridion. Thomas Paine's the same way. He's a deist. He is not a Christian. Thomas Paine and Jesus are Jefferson are the exceptions. All these other founders, they're hardcore Christians for the most part, especially Washington. The Anglican Church was very Christian back then. It's not like it is today, where it's bingo for refugees and lesbian clergy. Okay,
Yeah.
that's not how it was back then.
Yeah, and rainbow robes and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me go off on a tirade.
Oh,
about all that.
absolutely. No,
Yeah.
this is we've reached the point in the show where rambling is encouraged, because we've kind of talked about all the things that we had prepared to talk about, and I personally think that a lot of the best communication happens. Some of the best conversations I've had are just when I'm sitting on the porch with the brothers and just with a drink in my hand and just kind of shooting the breeze. A lot of foundational stuff happens at that point.
Do we have questions in the chat? If anyone wants to start putting those in, because we're going to be reading some of the things in the chat.
If you have questions for Musonius or myself or Sean about the show, put those in now, because we're getting ready. We've been going for 2 hours 20 minutes, and we're getting ready to wrap it up, just so we can go to bed.
Yeah.
Because, but let's get back to some of these comments. I'm sure it'll spark some more conversation as we go. So we left off with Dindinger. JHJ Dindinger says the concordant version of the Bible does have a very standardized usage for words. We'll definitely look into that. That sounds very interesting. I hadn't heard of it before, so very cool. He says, Dindinger again, he says OT as well. So the Old Testament, I think he's referring to the concordant version, comes in New and Old Testaments.
Yeah, let me try to find out concordant, because I had forgotten, frankly, about the concordant version.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at literal versions, it's a famous one.
Yeah. So I really like Olive Tree, because it's a very usable interface on my phone, but they're not the best about having things that you can get for free. And I'm finding the concordant, when I look it up in their stuff, because of the way search engines work, you look up concordant, and what you end up with is a bunch of Bibles with concordances. So it might be in there somewhere, but
the English translation of the Bible, compiled by the Concordant Publishing Concern, was founded by Adolf Ernst Knoch, Knoch, in 1909. The principal works of the CPC is the Concordant Literal New Testament with keyword concordance. Okay.
Oh wow. So Adolf is our guy.
That's what I heard.
It's Adolf with a PH. Adolf with a PH.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So what you're saying is I can name a kid Adolf as long as I spell it with a PH.
Spell it with the Greek pronunciation, with the or spelling of the name.
Yeah. Or we could, if we want to get Latin, we can name him Adolphus.
Yeah.
Seaside Life says, howdy, how late am I? I am terrible about following live streams. You are late, sir, but you can catch it tomorrow, so that's okay. John Carter says, you can't sign off tonight without a rebel yell. Musonius, is that something you're in the habit of doing?
I don't actually scream on my podcasts. And that is what a rebel yell is. It is a terrible blood-curdling scream. So,
I would join in on that, but my son is like on the other side of this wall trying to sleep, and I'm not trying to. My
kids are also asleep at the moment, so I'm not trying to wake them up. I'm also not trying to give them 1850s era nightmares.
We do a rebel yell as a camp at the end of every SCV meeting, so I definitely get one in at least once a month.
Nice, very based. Seaside Life says, "I second the rebel yell." Well, sorry to disappoint. Maybe we'll do that.
buddy.
Maybe we'll do that some other time. Maybe if we did that when he signed on, when the kids were still awake.
Yeah.
Let's see. JHJ Dindinger says, "What is your favorite resource to learn New Testament Greek on your own?"
I got you, brother.
Yeah,
Right
yeah,
here.
go, Sean.
This is going to be... I don't have the dust cover on this. I gave up on it at some point, like 10 years ago, whatever.
Yeah.
Can you see which way?
Let's
This
see.
is my favorite. This is
It says Essentials
of New Testament Greek by Summers. Let me see if I can get into the... Oh, that's a better way. There we go.
Oh, there you go. Essentials of New Testament Greek by Summers, revised. So, okay, very
who is
cool.
Broadman and Holman publishes this. This is, like I said, this is an 8-case system book. So the new ones, I forget the guy's name, out of Dallas Theological Seminary down the street. He will do a 5-case system. Everyone today does 5-case. This is kind of an older thing. James White does 8-case. I do 8-case because I wanted to learn from the teacher at my school that had been there since a million years ago. He's a super old guy, but he did 8-case. So I'm an 8-case supremacist. And if you get this, I will walk through this with you. I absolutely love this book. It's not long. I mean, you can see that you'll cover the basics though, and you'll learn a lot of vocab doing that. On top of that, this would be the second book. This is like down the line though.
Syntax of New Testament Greek by James A. Brooks and Carlton L. Winberry.
Yeah,
Okay.
This is going to get into that. Some of the stuff we were talking about today. Some of the, like, they'll take, like we were talking before the stream that like in Greek you'll have an ending to something and it can be genitive or ablative if you hold to the 8-case system. It's just genitive if you're a 5-case guy. But even within that, there's different branchings off, and how you define that specific type of genitive or ablative is going to change how you translate. This is like the getting into the weeds debate type book. It's awesome. I loved debating in my Greek class. I miss it. Other resources that you're going to want. This is they probably have a 6th edition of this, but this is Greek New Testament, which I forget which one this is. This is the UBS 5th. There's another one that's like in its 28th edition or something like that. Like there's I forget which one that is. This is a interlinear New Testament, Greek and English. And it will have every single word with the English. So, I mean, that's not going to show up great, but, and then it'll just have straight up an English translation in the margin. But this is, like I was saying, if I'm going deep, this is my reader. It's got the Greek and the English right there. One weakness is this does not have alternate readings, but if you have your Greek New Testament, then this one will have every single reading. In fact, when you look at it, that's actual Greek, and then this is all alternate readings down here. So that's how much. So those two, or well, I guess those 4 books are what I go to. The other stuff I have comes from school, so it's not something that's published. It's just like worksheets that are useful for me, but they were given to me by my professor, and you can't find them in a book or anything like that. So yeah, hope that helps. And if you or anyone else is ever interested in digging into the weeds of Greek, I would love to help you out. I can't get you all the way there. I'm not that qualified, but I would love to help in any way I could.
Yeah. Well, maybe that'll be another.
The Concordant is Lutheran.
No, he is getting that
he's
confused with the Book of Concord.
Monster.
The Concordant, as we were saying earlier, is
You're thinking this
a Bible translation. Yeah.
This is the
Book of Concord.
Book of Concord. Yeah, the Reader's Edition.
Yeah. Also great reading, but not the Bible.
Yeah.
Musonius, did you have resources that you recommend for Greek?
Well, I mean, I just usually, when people ask, I just go with Bill Mounts, and his Basics of Biblical Greek.
That's the guy I couldn't think of. There you go.
Yeah. William Mounts. Yeah, he's the one you couldn't think of. Bill.
Good old Bill.
Mounts. Yeah, good old Bill.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Seaside Life said the Concordant is Lutheran. We addressed that, and he says, that's right. Thanks for clearing that up. Yeah. Got welcome. That. All right. Well, folks, we have been going for 2.5 hours. Been a bit of a longer show tonight, but it's been a fun one. And Musonius, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, as always, you've been an absolute champ coming in here and doing this show. This show, folks, would not happen if it were not for Sean. I mean, he is the steel in my spine to keep me focused during the week because I can get distracted. So I really appreciate that. But tomorrow is a new day that God has prepared for us to do good works in. And hope you all have a happy rest of your Lord's Day. But it is about that time that you should go to bed. So thanks for sticking with the show for as long as you did. It has been a fun one. It has been a bit of a rambling and kind of autistic view of different Bible translations. But I think this has been a great eye-opener to a lot of people who have a lot of questions. So we appreciate y'all sticking in for as long as you did. But anyway, we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Lord's Day, and farewell.